Hey class, today we're going to continue on with the nervous system. In previous lessons, we focused a lot on the microscopic anatomy of nerve tissue, and then we looked at how is a nerve impulse propagated and sent down an axon, and how does it go from one neuron to another at the microscopic level. Today we're going to focus on the major divisions of the nervous system, and so we're going to look at more gross anatomy structures. We're going to begin by talking about there are two major divisions that the nervous system is split into. The first one is called the central nervous system. We abbreviate this as CNS. And the second part is the peripheral nervous system, and we abbreviate this PNS. They both include different structures. For example, the central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord, whereas the peripheral nervous system is going to include any nerves that extend off of the brain and spinal cord. For example, this includes cranial nerves that act to move the eye, for your taste buds, to digest food in your stomach, and the most famous spinal nerve is your sciatic nerve that you may have heard adults talk about that function in the lower back and extend into the leg. One thing to know about these two major divisions is that they do work hand in hand and communicate with each other. So we see two arrows here. Information is going to go from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. The central nervous system, we're going to learn, processes that information and then sends it back to our peripheral nervous system to eventually go to different organs, glands, etc. Today we're going to focus on the central nervous system though. As a reminder, they do consist of the brain and spinal cord, and it occupies our dorsal body cavity. The functions of the central nervous system is it acts as the integration and command center, it interprets incoming sensory information, and it issues outgoing instructions. So what that all means is if you touch a thumbtack, it's going to receive that information from that stimulus, and you're going to receive and understand that you are in pain. It's going to integrate that information in your brain and say, hey, I'm in pain, what should I do next? It's going to decide those next steps and then issue the instructions for what to do next, such as contracting your muscle to pull your hand away. There are two major things that are part of the central nervous system. What we're going to focus on a majority of today is the brain. Now, one thing to note is it is the largest and most complex organ that we have in our body. And while I am going to talk about the brain, I am going to talk about it in general, broad terms. We will not get into too specific things, but it's still going to be a lot of information. So if you have any questions, please make sure you ask. I am also going to separate the central nervous system into part 1 and part 2 to kind of help delegate and split this information up. One thing to know about the brain is it consists of 4 regions: the cerebral hemispheres, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. The cerebral hemispheres is what we're going to focus on today, and sometimes this is abbreviated cerebrum. Here's an image to show the adult brain. Again, we're going to focus a majority of today's lesson on the cerebral hemisphere, which is the largest structure that most people identify when they look at a brain picture. Tomorrow, or in the next lesson, we're going to talk about the diencephalon, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. These structures are more internal, and so you don't see them necessarily when you're looking at a brain. So our cerebral hemispheres of our brain, like we said, is sometimes called the cerebrum to be shorter. They are paired left and right parts of your brain, and they're the superior parts. So this is going to be the topmost part of your brain that you see. There is a major landmark on the brain called a longitudinal fissure, and this separates your brain into your left and right lobes, or your left and right halves. The other thing to note about cerebral hemispheres of the brain is there are different pathways or connections in our brain, and some of them are considered to be crossed. Sensory, think of the word, this comes from our senses, and our motor pathways, motor means muscles or movement, these pathways are crossed. And all that means is that the right side of the brain processes sensory and motor information from our left side of our body. For example, if I feel pain in my right hand, my left side of the brain is actually processing that pain and deciding what to do. Here's an image of that major landmark, the longitudinal fissure. If you were to take a college class, you'll also learn that we do have this kind of groove-like feature of our brains. We have ridges, and then we have the top parts. You'll learn that those are called sulci and gyri. Now, within our brain, they have to communicate with each other. So our cerebral hemisphere is such a big, massive part of our brain. There are different fiber tracts that allow us to communicate. There are 3 different types. The first type are called commissures. This allows our right and left half to communicate. There is a super famous and well-known fiber tract called the corpus callosum that allows the left and right half to communicate. The second type are called association fibers, and this connects areas within a hemisphere to be able to associate with each other. And then the last one is called projection fibers. This connects our cerebrum to other structures of the brain, such as the diencephalon, brainstem, or cerebellum. So if I were to bring this up in the picture, we have 3 different types. Commissures, again, these are our green fibers. You can see it connects our left and our right halves. Association fibers, this is represented by the pink. Notice that they're always going to be connecting everything on one side of the brain. So if you look at the one that it's pointing to, it's associating everything on the right side of the brain with something else that's happening in the right side of the brain. And then our last one is a projection fibers. This is going to be connecting part of your brain to another part of your brain. So for example, the one that it's pointing to, connecting your cerebrum with lower structures such as your brainstem or your diencephalon. One thing to also know about the brain is that it contains lobes that are named for the cranial bones that lie below them. So we talked about 4 major cranial bones. The first one is frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. We're going to talk about these one at a time. So we're going to first focus on our frontal lobe. The primary responsibility for the frontal lobe is to have higher level cognitive processes, have motor control, and it also helps determine some of your personality traits that we see. There are different areas in the frontal lobe that control different things. The 3 major areas that we're going to talk about is the primary motor area, the anterior association area, and the Broca's area. The primary motor area is going to control voluntary movements. So motor means to move. And again, voluntary means you have control over them. So this is going to send signals to our muscles throughout our body. The second area is called the anterior association area. This is going to be higher level reasoning and problem solving skills. This is going to be language comprehension. And this is going to be with working memory and your judgment. Should you do this? Should you not? Is this appropriate actions or is it not appropriate actions? So typically you might hear people say, oh, if they're younger, their frontal lobe is not developed yet. And that's because this area of our brain does have higher level reasoning and judgment calls. The third major structure is called the Broca's area. This is sometimes called the motor speech area because it's involved in our ability to speak. So motor means movement. It moves our mouth to make different sounds and say words properly. If we were to look at our brain and our frontal region, again, primary motor area is located up in this region. Our anterior association area, which it has the following functions, working memory, judgment, problem solving, and language comprehension, are located right here in the front, hence anterior. And then our Broca area is located around here for our motor speech. The next lobe that we're going to focus on is our parietal lobe. The primary responsibility of this lobe is to process sensory information, some spatial awareness, and for mathematical reasoning. The major area that we focus on and that I would like you guys to know is called the primary somatic sensory area. Sensory just means senses. This part of the brain receives impulses from our body's sensory receptors. So this processes things like pain, temperature, pressure, such as light touch. It does exclude any special senses. So when I say special senses, I'm talking about sight, I'm talking about taste, and I'm talking about like smell. Here is our parietal lobe. Our primary somatic sensory area is going to be located up here in this area. Next, we're going to go to our occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is the very posterior part of our brain. This is primarily responsible for any visual processing as well as perception of light, color, and shapes. So we have two major areas here. The first one is our visual area, so exactly what it sounds like, visual, vision. This is going to receive visual inputs from our eyes. It identifies light intensity, contrast, and different colors. And then our second area is called the posterior association area. Again, posterior means behind or the back. This is going to further process the visual information that the visual area takes in, and it actually allows us to process what we're reading or see what we're reading, recognize patterns, and helps us recognize different faces that we have. So usually they try to say, make sure that you don't get a blow to the back of your head because, like I said, this can affect your vision. So here we have two areas of our occipital lobe. We have our visual area, and then again our posterior association area. And then the last lobe that we're going to look at is temporal. This is primarily responsible for any auditory processing. So when we say the word auditory, this has to be listening. This is memory formation, olfactory, which stands for smell, and then language comprehension. The three major areas that I would like you guys to know is first, the auditory area. This is going to receive input from our ears and it processes sounds such as pitch, volume, and tone. The other major structure that's part of this is going to be where your hippocampus is located. This is essential for formation of new memories, and it also allows us to take short-term memory and turn it into long-term memory. And the last section is Wernicke's area. This is responsible for speech comprehension and understanding. So it's different from the Broca's area. Broca's area was actually forming that speech and being able to move your mouth to say what you want. Wernicke's area is responsible for comprehending that speech and being able to talk in a logical way. So over here we have a couple different areas. Here's your Wernicke's area back here. We have our auditory area, again, hearing, and then olfactory or smell. And then this is also, and I did not put this on the previous slide, this is where a lot of our taste stuff is as well. I didn't include taste because taste does kind of overlap with the parietal area, so I didn't want to just put it in the temporal area. And that's the end of today's lesson. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask, and I hope you have a great day.